Starting live video. Hello everyone, hopefully there's someone watching. My name's Anwyn, this is my emotional support animal Yoda. He's going to be hanging out for the video. And today we're going to be talking about emotional support animals and living with them on campus and accommodations and what it's like to have one. So before we get started, I want to remind you that I will have some stuff to talk about, but if you ask questions, I'll have more interesting things to talk about. Questions about living on campus with an emotional support animal, or about emotional support animals in general, or about Yoda if you like. He's crawling off my lap, sorry. And so with that said, some stuff about me first, so you know where I'm coming from. My name's Anwyn. I'm a student at Hampshire College currently, and in the summers I'm an intern at the Transitions ACR, which is why you are seeing this video. And when I am on campus at Hampshire College, this guy Yoda lives with me in my dorm room. So the whole point of this video, what is an emotional support animal? So I'm gonna look at the definition here. So an emotional support animal is an animal that provides therapeutic support for their owner through affection and companionship. And so they're good for dealing with mental health because they really help with a lot of symptoms generally. So for me personally, Yoda is crawling off my lap, but he's really good for keeping on a routine. You know, you have to feed a dog regularly. I feed him every night at 6:30. You have to give him water. He has to go for walks, which is really helpful because it gets me outside, and like even when I don't want to go outside, when I feel like I can't, I'm still his caretaker, and so it like really motivates me to get outside and walk around campus and like get some fresh air, which is always good for health. And then some other things that are also helpful, obviously the actual emotional support part of emotional support animal is like he's great and he's my friend and he's cuddly and he knows, I swear he knows when I'm like not feeling well, and so if I'm in a bad mood, he'll come up and he'll lick my face and he'll cuddle up with me, and so it's kind of like having like this nice living teddy bear. And so they're great for that. And other animals can be emotional support animals too, so like I've got a friend who's got a cat and like they're great too. And when we go on walks, he's really helpful for meeting people. So especially early on in my college experience, I came in freshman year having him, and I met a lot of my like now friends through walking him, and everyone wants to pet him because he's so cute and I love him. And so I got introduced to a lot of people, and now when I'm out and about and I maybe am like not really feeling super social, he kind of can do socializing for me. He forces me to talk to people a little bit when I really need to, so it keeps me from isolating, which is, you know, a common problem for a lot of people with mental health. And so he's just really helpful for that. Other animals can be helpful in different ways too. You know, not all emotional support animals need walks or need the same sort of care. So different animals provide different kinds of support and different kind of things depending on what you're looking for from your animal. He's gonna squirm out of frame, I think, here. So then one of the questions that people a lot of the time ask is like, what's the difference between types of animals that like you see around? So emotional support animals, ESAs I call them. So ESAs and therapy animals and service animals. And there are three different essentially types of jobs for animals. So a service animal is sort of like the highest ranking. They've got the biggest job because they get a lot of training so that they can provide support and do actual like tasks for people with disabilities. So if you think about like seeing eye dogs are service animals. They're trained to lead their owner around. They're trained, you know, sometimes there are dogs that are trained to like sense if you're gonna have like some sort of heart condition, like sense if you're gonna have a stroke, like dogs that are really doing jobs to help people with their health. And that's different from an ESA because they're not necessarily just for mental health, and they're trained to actually do a specific thing, where emotional support animals aren't trained. He just was my pet, and then I went to college and and he became my emotional support. But emotional support animals don't need to have training because they're not really doing a sort of official job in the same way. Service animals also can go anywhere that their owner goes. So like if you're in a restaurant and you see a dog or you see a miniature horse, something like that, that's usually a service animal because an emotional support animal can't go anywhere. They don't have the same like types of rights. So you see a dog in the grocery store, that's a service animal. Whereas emotional support animals are really meant for personal places. So at college, for me, he's only really officially allowed in my residence. He doesn't go to class with me, he doesn't go grocery shopping. So really, emotional support animals are, service animals have a really kind of like high-ranking job, and they have a lot of things to do. And then therapy animals are also a separate deal. So therapy animals would be in a therapeutic setting, so like you see them in therapists' offices or like psychiatrists' offices. They're there to help with the therapy itself, and so it's like calming to sit and pet a dog while you're talking to someone, but that dog usually belongs to the office, not to the person who's the like patient or doing the talking. It's not your personal dog, it's like the office's dog that's doing a job. So those guys are different from ESAs because they're kind of owned by like a public, I don't know, domain. They're owned by the therapist and used for therapy specifically, whereas ESAs would be used in a personal setting, like I was saying. Those are pretty much the main differences. If you have other questions, I can try to answer them. People get really confused sometimes about like vests, because sometimes people put vests on their emotional support animals, which you're not really supposed to do, but usually if you see an animal wearing like a red vest or something, that's usually a service animal. Let's see. How do you get an ESA? How did I end up with Yoda? So essentially, because of the nature of their job, which is really just sort of like be a good friend, be a good animal, any animal can be an ESA. So like I was saying, Yoda was my pet dog, and then I went off to college and decided that he was going to be beneficial for my mental health if I brought him. And so if you're like me and you go to college or university, then in order to have an ESA on campus, you have to register him with, or her, with the school. And for my school, that's through an accommodation through the housing office, like a residential accommodation. So I had to have my mental health professional write a letter saying that Yoda, who's down here, Yoda here is beneficial for my mental health in a way that affects my schooling. And then, so now I have him as an accommodation. I had to give, paperwork and say he goes to the vet and he is registered with the town and that sort of thing, so there's documentation of it. And so that's sort of it's essentially a lot easier than getting like a service animal, because you're not getting a specific animal that's been trained. It's your dog or your animal. Sometimes people have bunnies, sometimes people have like other things. But the important part is that your mental health professional writes that letter that says, like, yes, they're not just keeping a pet, like this animal is therapeutic for them, and that they need to have this animal on campus or wherever you are. So that sort of brings me to the end of my prepared questions of sort of like what's going on with emotional support animals and what's that like. We do have, I wanted to let you know that we have a video episode that's called Therapy Animals, the Types and Your Rights. If you wanted to learn more, there's going to be a link down in the description or comments or something. That's put out by the Transitions ACR. That'll give you like more information and kind of like the title says, like about your rights to have animals and what's going on there. If people have other questions, I would be happy to answer them now. Any sort of questions related to the topic? I don't know, Tanya, do we have any questions?
We have a question from Marianne Davis. And her question is, do you have a roommate, and does she like Yoda?
I don't have a roommate. Hampshire College is kind of odd in that it mostly has single rooms, so I got there freshman year, and Yoda's been my roommate since. In the fall, when I go back in a couple of weeks, I will have a roommate, and she knows Yoda and she loves Yoda, and so we're gonna sort of be three in a double room. But for the most part, people have been really, really great about it. People really like having animals on campus. A lot of people come up to me and are like, "Oh, I miss my dog at home. Can I just get some dog love?" And he's supposed to be officially, he's sort of supposed to be support for me, but I kind of feel like he's support for everyone. So people will come to me and be like, "I'm just having a day. Can I pet Yoda? Or can I have a hug?" So it's really nice. A well-received thing on campus, I would say.
We have another question by Sarah Feifel. Sorry if I'm murdering your name. But the question is, what are your thoughts and feelings with people with mental health conditions that are trying to convince others that their ESA is a service animal?
I assume you mean sort of falsely saying that, having a non-service animal and trying to get them. So a lot of the time, people who have, or I won't say a lot of the time, but it's tempting to want to bring your dog or your emotional support animal into spaces that they aren't officially allowed. So things like you want to maybe take them to restaurants, or you want to take them out into spaces that service animals are allowed because they're doing their job, but emotional support animals are not typically allowed. And I certainly understand that, and I would love to take Yoda all sorts of places, but I also think that if you sort of fake it and you sort of muddy the rules, that it's detrimental to the actual service animals, that if people think that's what happens with a service animal, or ESAs don't have to be trained, so if you bring your animal into a space and then they behave poorly or something goes wrong, that reflects badly on service animals then, because you've misrepresented the group. So I really don't like when people do that. That really upsets me, because I feel like it's not fair, and that you're sort of trying to take up a space that you shouldn't. I guess that's it for questions. If anyone... Oh, Laura, who's sitting over here, has a question.
I know you talked a little bit about the process you had to go through to get Yoda approved at Hampshire.
Yeah.
Do you feel that was an easy process? Do you feel your college was supportive, or did you kind of have to jump through hoops?
I would say for me it was an easy process. The main sort of thing that you need to do is get that letter from your mental health professional, and there are some requirements around who that person can be. And so for me, I had been seeing my therapist for 6 months or maybe a year already, and so I didn't have any problem with those requirements. I just said, hey, can you write this thing? We've been talking about it forever, I just need the paperwork. But I have a friend who had been switching therapists a lot, and so he hadn't been with one therapist for the amount of time that they were requiring, and so he wanted to bring his emotional support animal to college, and they didn't accept the letter from his I think therapist, because they hadn't been seeing him long enough. And so then he wasn't allowed to have the animal on campus, and that's really hard because you're planning and you assume it'll work out, and especially if you come from out of state, you're bringing this animal, what are you gonna do with it? You're away from home. And so I didn't have any trouble, but I've definitely seen people have trouble with it, and it's always, I understand why the rule exists, but it's always really really heartbreaking, because then you got to do something with the animal, and they're separated from the animal, and just because they don't have the letter doesn't mean that they don't deserve to have that animal's support. And so I think it definitely varies from school to school, but it's unfortunate that sometimes it doesn't work out when it definitely should.
So we have 2 more questions.
Aha, more questions.
What is traveling with an ESA like?
So I don't have a lot of experience with it. I go to school in state, so I'm from Massachusetts, and Hampshire College is in Western Mass. It's like I drive out to school, so I really only have car experience with him, and he takes a nap in the crate on the drive over. I know that there are sort of there's a lot of things around plane trips. Lately there was a big sort of scandal in the news because someone tried to bring an emotional support peacock on an airplane. And officially, if you tell the airline and you provide that letter of support from your mental health professional, you're supposed to be able to bring your animal on, but it is, I believe, at the airline's discretion, and so that's sort of where the conflict came in. I think if you have a sort of more typical emotional support animal, like, you probably don't run into that issue as much. Maybe some planning is required, but I don't have any personal experience with sort of like bigger travel with him.
Another question is, do you know of any laws locally or in your state about ESA?
I don't know too much about the laws. I'm trying to think. I believe that having an ESA I should have checked. I thought about checking. Might be under the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is sort of deals with accommodations for academics and employment. So like I also receive academic accommodations, I get extra time on tests and that sort of thing. So I deal with that with some regularity, and I know that the ADA law particularly pertains to those accommodations, but I'm not sure if they pertain to sort of residential accommodations in that way. So I could check. Sorry, I don't have an answer.
I think there might definitely be more information about that in the Come Back TV video about therapy.
We think there's more information in the video that's linked below, so check that out. And if not, I'm sure it's on Google, but sorry, I don't have that answer.
And another question is, how did you decide what kind of animal would be a good ESA for you? Why not a guinea pig or a bunny?
That's a really good question. I took a long time to decide. So the spring before I was going to college, I was having sort of a really rough mental health time, and we decided that an ESA would be a good idea for me for going to school. But then we had, the decision of like, what animal are we gonna bring? And I actually talked to a vet friend about it. And I had gone into it thinking maybe that I wanted like a bunny or a guinea pig, some of the things you mentioned, like a smaller, like a cage animal. But I had done some research, and my vet friend had said that those animals are nice, but they're not very openly affectionate. So if you think about the way that like dogs typically are, it's very like, you get home and they're happy to see you and they're lovey and they're like licky, whereas like rodents like bunnies and stuff are less openly affectionate, and require a different type of care because there's all of that like cage cleaning and like a different kind of exercise. And so between looking at the sort of emotional support that an animal could provide for me, that like behavioral kind, and then also the like what the needs of the animal were. So like some people I'm sure would struggle with an animal that needs to be walked frequently, and like maybe cats are better for those people, or like smaller animals. But for me, the the sort of like dog needs fit very well because it helps me get outside and sort of the stuff I was mentioning earlier. I also grew up with dogs. I've always had dogs, so it felt very natural to then kind of take on those responsibilities, and I knew how to do it. I wasn't learning a new animal and a new place and a new school and, you know, all of that. So it was sort of a combination of factors, but I would, if you're thinking about it, I would recommend looking at what the care looks like and then trying to balance that against what the benefits would be and think about if it's worth it for that animal.
So I know you said that you haven't heard much about the ADA or something like that, but maybe it has like campus administration, like have they told you anything about what happens if the ESA misbehaves in the residence? Like, is there any consequence?
I know that there are. I haven't had personal experience with it. I know that they always say, like, if they do certainly take complaints, so they want to hear, like, you know, if he's loud and the neighbors are not happy with it, that I think my understanding is that there's sort of a warning type, like 3 strikes you're out type of deal, where it's like starts with having a conversation, and then if it continues, then maybe you're starting to talk about sort of more serious consequences. And I think if it was significant enough, that they would ask you to not have the animal anymore. I'm not sure of the exact policies, and I would expect that it differs at different schools, but my understanding it's sort of like starts with a gentle warning and then gets stronger depending on what the behavior is and that kind of thing.
So I guess you wouldn't know anything about housing yet, like an independent like apartment building or anything like that.
I don't have any personal experience with it. I know that it's supposed to be sort of the same process. You're supposed to provide that letter and that documentation to whoever sort of is providing the place to you, the landlord or whatever it is, whoever you're paying the money to, and that is supposed to be enough for them to say this is okay, unless they have some really like extenuating circumstances. So it's not the same as asking to have a pet, but I'm sure that there are all sorts of situations that happen sort of when they're not supposed to, certainly, and some people don't understand emotional support animals and probably think it's a pet, and I'm sure there's some discrimination that goes on, but I don't have personal experience with it, so.
How long did it take to get Yoda through the training program, and how much did it cost? Like, well, I guess.
Yeah, so like I was saying earlier with the different types of animals, so ESAs don't require training. They aren't trained animals. He's essentially a pet that provides therapeutic value to me. Service animals, like the ones that lead the blind and do other jobs for different types of disabilities or different abilities, they get intensive training, and depending on what they're asked to do. So more typically with a service animal, you would essentially buy an already trained animal or put them through a training program, but for emotional support animals, they don't actually have any training. It's great if they have like good behavior, and especially because they're in spaces that pets wouldn't always be. It's great if they're well behaved, but they aren't required to, and they don't have to have any sort of certain specifications. So Yoda I got from a breeder because I was looking for a corgi, and we did a little bit of like typical training. He can sit, he won't stay. He mostly comes when called, that kind of thing. But he didn't have to go through any like official training program in order to be at school or anything like that. I think we're out of questions, and so with that, I guess we'll come to a close. If you want to leave questions like in the comments after this video closes, I'd be happy to get on and type out questions or type out answers to things and stuff like that. But other than that, we're gonna say goodbye. I will pick. He fell asleep on the couch, but I'll pick him up to say goodbye because his face is so sweet.
Would you mind one random last question?
Oh, we have a random last question. We're gonna. He's very sleepy.
Why specifically a corgi out of the dogs?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things is size, because I knew I was going to be in a dorm room, so I didn't want to get a big dog, because I mean, they could live in a dorm room, but I think it's kind of sad to keep a big dog in a dorm room where they don't have enough space to move around, so walks are really important. But I wanted to have a relatively small dog that kind of could have a decent space in a single dorm room. And also for the temperament, so they're known, I've heard that they're kind of like big dogs in small bodies, and that has been my experience, that they're not as like single person oriented as small dogs tend to be. Sometimes small dogs are sort of aggressive and like really protective of their owner, but I don't find him to be that way, and I haven't heard that corgis generally are. And they're just generally known for being good, sweet, like family dogs, and so it just ended up being like a combination of qualities that really made sense to me.
Okay. So one last question.
One more question.
It'll be the last.
The last question.
Do you think it would be a good idea if there were more formal training and or regulations for ESAs specifically?
I don't know that there needs to be. I don't know how often there are behavioral issues that come up with emotional support animals. I haven't seen any on my campus that I'm aware of. I think some general, sort of general animal training is a good thing and a good idea for anyone. But I don't think that really needs to be more regulations or specifications. I don't know if by regulations maybe you mean like where they can be, and the differences between them and service animals, like I was talking about earlier, where the lines sort of get blurry, because I think there are real regulations. It's just that people try to get around them. So mostly I think people who have ESAs should be respectful of the people around them, because even though it is absolutely your right to have an animal there, other people are still living there and having to sort of deal with the consequences. And so if your animal is not well behaved, maybe you're still allowed to have him there, but it's not very nice. And so essentially just like be a reasonable person and respectful of your neighbors, and then they can enjoy the animal too. Alright, I think that's the end. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll, see you again with another video soon, hopefully.